Okay, it looks like we have quite a few people on the line, so let's get started. My name is Liz Melton. I'm a client partner at Retina AI, and it's my pleasure to be moderating a discussion with Michael Greenberg, who is the president and co-founder of Retina, as well as James Hodson, who is the head of partnerships at Retention Science. I just want to let you guys know that we do have a Q&A feature. So if you have questions as we go along, please type your question in the Q&A box or in the chat. So today, obviously, our topic of discussion is using customer lifetime value to optimize retention campaigns. Before we kick it off, I just want to have you guys both introduce yourselves. So Michael, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Liz. My name is Michael Greenberg. I was one of the co-founders here at Retina. We're now a 3-year-old company, and I'd like to say that we are at the vanguard right now of really calculating customer lifetime value as early as possible in the customer journey and helping companies achieve profitability at the unit economic level. So I'm super excited to be here and talking about the many case studies that you can leverage once you have an accurate CLV prediction.
Awesome. And James, how about you?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me and thank you for joining. I'm James Hodson, head of partnerships for Retention Science. I spent about 10 years in e-commerce so far. The first 3 were with my own brand, had my own footwear shoe brand. Retention Science is an artificial intelligence email automation customer data platform. So we really help brands deliver personalized experiences to each customer as your brand scales. So now I get to do it for hundreds of brands, what I was trying to do for my one little small one.
Awesome. Great to have you guys here today. So we're going to kind of go through exactly what customer lifetime value is, talk about retention and personalization with that context, and then how to really use CLV in an actionable way in your business and show some case studies that Michael and James have prepared. So Michael, I'll kick it off with you. What exactly is customer lifetime value?
Yes, so it's a great question because on the surface, it seems like a very, very simple question. If anyone who's gone through business school or has had to do discounted cash flows might, hear this old adage of customer lifetime value is just the discounted value of future profits a customer brings in. And if you scale all those up together, you might get a valuation for a business. The problem is, from a marketing standpoint, that's not valuable. For one reason, you have to be able to predict accurately all of these future generated revenues. And secondly, oftentimes when I'm in the market talking to many sophisticated marketers, I'll get 5 different definitions even within the same business about what lifetime value is. So, we'll hear things like lifetime value is just the last year of revenue a customer brings in. It could be as much as, customer lifetime value is just at a cohort level, not really at the customer level. So I'd love to kind of lay some groundwork here as an operational definition going forward on how we think about it and what are the elements that go into customer lifetime value. So you see here with this slide, each one of the hash marks represents a purchase. And so from first purchase to the next purchase, you're going to get these intertransaction times. So, the gaps that are taking place on that x-axis, that's time. And as we go forward to present day, you then shift into this historic purchase rate or historic lifetime value to this residual or future lifetime value. So for a customer who might have just joined today, you're only going to get that first purchase, and the bulk of their CLV will be in this predictive state. Whereas a customer that may have churned that's been with you for 10 years, the bulk has been fully realized. So when speaking about customer lifetime value, I like to speak about it in totality. That historical amount you've already realized, as well as those unrealized revenues to come. So this is a great way of thinking about it.
Wonderful. And do you want to launch into any of the models that you might use to calculate customer lifetime value?
So I'm sure we have a blend of technical levels of technicality here on the call. In fact, I checked some of the lists beforehand, and I might be invoking one of my favorite professors, again, from UCLA, who may or may not be on this call. But one thing, again, when you're thinking as a marketer, especially if you're a marketer working with other data scientists or working with technology platforms, it's important to disambiguate what goes into these CLV scores because they are not created equal. And if they're inaccurate, it can do a lot more harm than good. So the first and most basic table stakes way of thinking about it that I see in most businesses is this cohort or retention-based model. So this is something where you take all of the cohort that just came in and you basically look at, over time with those famous triangle charts, how are they churning over time? And you start to add sort of predicted values on that, saying, I know the average life cycle for these customers that were acquired in Q1 might be 10 months, and I have their average order size, and I kind of multiply those two things to get a average lifetime value. You're going to, oftentimes with this RFM type mechanism at a cohort level, you're going to get a lot of error rates, but it is good for sort of aggregate predictions that you may need to give to the finance team or the CFO who's asking you, especially during board meetings, where are we and how are we tracking? The next level deeper though, is when you start harnessing things like machine learning. Now, machine learning, there are a lot of techniques here that you can use. So there are multiple models that can be deployed. But one thing that you do get now is a lot more accuracy, and you can predict earlier in the customer journey what effectively a customer might be worth downstream. The problem here is these don't have really good generative draws, and we can get into later in Q&A what that means. But effectively, you can't just start spinning up what a customer would be worth 10 or 20 years out if you only have, let's say, 2 years of historical data. You're going to be limited to this forward prediction window based on your historical data that you're leveraging. So that brings us to the next model, which was made famous actually out of Wharton by Professor Pete Fader and another professor named Daniel McCarthy. And these are these buy till you die models, obviously very ironically named here. But what these do now is they don't predict early in this customer journey. You're going to need to observe 3, 4, 5 transactions for a customer, but they do allow you to start predicting farther out what a customer might be worth. So we see these are very in vogue with CFOs who want to start looking at 5, 10, even 20-year customer lifetime values in certain cases for a customer, but they do have actionability issues for marketers. Because if you'll notice, you can't predict at first transaction. So you might wait up to a year or 2 years to get an accurate prediction for that customer that just came in today. And then finally, you have these extremely state-of-the-art models, which we'll talk more about later because they have specific applications. But these are things like GLRN. So these are generalized low rank models or clustering models, if you want to think of them that way. For those on the call who are data scientists, they're based on convex optimization. And then you also have generalized neural networks, which also can require heavy data sets, but can give you very, very good predictions. The good news here is, while GNNs are not interpretable, GLRM is extremely interpretable because you can actually see all the different covariates that go into it. So in a sense, all the signals that might make up what is driving or correlated with this customer lifetime value, you can easily start to see how they're correlated with the overall output. So later on, when we talk about ways that you can leverage it, that can have value. But as you can see here, there's a menu of options to choose from based on where you're at in your business and the kind of historical data you have. The idea I want to leave you with, though, is that the just basic way of doing it at cohort is going to, in a way, not allow you to harness a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for that overview. And James, let's say I've calculated CLV. How would I use that in terms of retention and think about it in terms of marketing automation?
Sorry, I muted just so there was no background noise. But I think the really key components of taking action on CLV and making it useful are keeping in mind. I think part of what Resai set out to do has been to help answer really tough questions that executives have wanted, and who are my top 20% customers, right? And I should be focusing most of my energy on that 20% because they're going to generate the majority of our revenue moving forward. And so I think focus is a big point on using that CLV number, because then you can make sure, hey, I'm actually spending time on someone that's going to move the business forward, or they're not going to be a one and done. And I think also looking at that CLV and how similar customers interact, how can I move someone to the greatest possible CLV number, and can I do similar marketing to what that other user saw, based on the behaviors that user one took or user two. And what this chart actually highlights, I think this is one of the most powerful graphs we actually put out. And we're very heavy on the commerce side, but it looks at time between purchases, and it looks at the average order value of each order as the number of orders increases. And then it also looks at the percentage of the database that churns over time, between each order. So Michael, I actually really liked your chart where it showed, the risk of churn. It got a little bit more yellow as you got close to that third or fourth purchase. Very similar here, where most brands we notice, the average order value increases with the number of purchases, which I think is a very interesting thing for a lot of brands, and we see that here. And so how can you cross-sell products on that second or third purchase? How can you expose them to the category is a really big thing. Another big thing we see across a lot of brands are the days between orders tends to decrease as the number of orders increases. And so these are all metrics that I think you should keep in mind as you're thinking about how do I increase LTV or how do I use it. But if we can shrink or shorten the days between purchase or run marketing campaigns at that exact moment, I think a lot of brands historically have said, oh yeah, people come back, every 3 months. And so just every 90 days, they'll follow up. But what if I could tell you, Michael's coming back in 124 days and he's going to make a purchase that is $71. That's very powerful, rich information that a marketer can take action on.
Absolutely.
That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely it does. And do you think you could share a more real life example of this? I know you have a few brands that you've done this for.
Yeah, we've done a couple really good ones. And so I like to think on the retention aspect. One of my favorite brands we work with is Figs. They do scrubs. They're based here in Santa Monica as well. And they have just a highly creative, highly intelligent VP of marketing who loves telling stories. And he's very smart and thoughtful and tactical about how does he stay top of mind so that the customers remember when they're at that kind of moment when it's relevant to engage with them. And so I think coming up with creative ways to re-engage these users, and the real story is, okay, we took this LTV model. How do we provide content that isn't always centered around sales? And so, if you kind of marry the previous chart at 124 days, Michael spending $71, what kind of content does then Michael want to see, and how can we personalize that? Does he resonate with being an awesome human? Does he resonate with socks? And so I think that's where you can take your LTV model and say, okay, what do my top 20% customers really resonate with, and what's the messaging that goes along with them, and how do I get that right message in front of them based off of that number? And really taking action off that data and that score that you're getting is super important. And they've seen just a tremendous improvement above and beyond what they were doing before, which was a very kind of linear marketing. And I think, industry-wide, e-commerce in general, Amazon has proved out that this level of personalization really impacts by at least 30% revenue. So personalizing this down to the individual user, getting the right message to each LTV customer is really, really important.
Yeah, James, can I jump in on this? Because I love the quiz flow here. And by the way, for the record, I do resonate with being an awesome human. Whether or not it's true, I definitely would respond to that marketing in a heartbeat. But in this quiz, this is fascinating. And this goes back to, for everyone who's thinking about customer lifetime value models and predictions, what goes into prediction and what can you actually leverage? So great marketers, I'm sure the person who's the VP of marketing here knows that if somebody takes I like, Kanye West more, and there's a few pockets, they may start developing some heuristics like, I know that's a better customer, because at the human scale, start to remember,
Yep.
oh yeah, people who go through that flow spend more. What we're trying to do is take quiz data that you might have on sites, things that historically could not go actually into these CLV models that only took transaction data. Now we can take this data here and actually use it to also predict what is going to be their future customer lifetime value at first transaction, and what are those pathways and signals that are highly correlated with that high CLV. So first huge tip that you guys are doing so well here, but that I recommend to anyone listening, do quizzes, do personalization prior to first transaction in the onboarding, because that is gold. That data can now be harnessed for not just predictive CLV with cutting edge models, it can also be used for highlighting and optimizing these customer journeys. So I'm seeing this all over the place, and the most sophisticated shops are absolutely doing this.
Yeah, and Michael, would you want to share an example of this that we've done at Retina?
Yeah, sure. So, this is coming from a leading grooming brand, but before I share it, we jump in. I have to give a shout out to a professor at UCLA, Professor Bodapati, who asks a very good question with a lot of his research, which is around marketing elasticity. So we've all heard about price elasticity, which is how much, changing price might affect a customer's behavior. Marketing elasticity is the other side of this coin. How much does marketing interactions affect their behavior or inflect it? And it's a great question and it's an important question, but it's a hard question, a hard one to prove an experiment on. So it's one that a lot of marketers, especially in the past before they had these really sophisticated platforms, kind of had to pass over in silence. So you just bomb everyone with email or bomb them with other things because we don't know what the cost is of not doing it. Well, one of the leaders of measurement at Google said this: customers are going to behave the way they're going to behave. And so you mentioned, James, the Pareto rule, which is look at your top 20% of your best customers and focus on that. Kind of boils down to this, which is if you're not acquiring a quality customer up front, odds are you're not going to turn them to gold later. So what I'm about to show you is really around how do I bring in the right customer for me? And I think this is more critical than ever because scaling with unprofitable customers is no longer something we can do. So let's jump in. So what I'm about to show you is what comes out of some of these really cutting edge algorithms that we just talked about, like these models like GLRM, and what you're going to get for it. So if you remember before, we had that amazing quiz flow of do you like Kanye or George Clooney, and then do you want pockets or not pockets? This particular leading brand asked a similar quiz at onboarding. They're going to ask you, what's your hair type? What's your skin sensitivity? Where did you come in from? And we take all of those different signals, in a sense, all of those covariates that are coming in, and we're able to almost, if you want to think of it like this, build an internal lookalike. We can look at all these customer journeys. We see the predicted CLV that they become, and you can start to earlier and earlier in the customer journey say, by flowing through this channel, there's a high likelihood they're going to land in this range. So what you see on that lifetime revenue 5-year side, that's that range that we see for customers that have these attributes you see to the right. And why I love this chart is it shows you how you have to go beyond the human scale on just taking guesses on what are your good signals. So for instance, if we go to the next slide, let's look at the best ones in this group. So, you talked, James, about that top 20%. We see this all the time. The bulk of the revenue in this business, in fact, it's, almost 50%, is coming from 16% of their customers, right? So it's an incredibly important cohort, but let's look at what the signals are. So with this particular business, if a person had straight hair, that was the big signal for the best kind of customer. That's the blue bar in that hair type. And one thing that comes out of the Retina platform, but that could come out of any really good data scientist group too, if they understand how to use these very cutting edge tools, is you're going to get these covariates. And so the marketer said, well, I've seen that before. It's kind of like what we talked about. Everybody who goes through Kanye is going to be the best. Everybody, they said, who had straight hair in this quiz, they're our best customers. So we're going to have all our marketing creative against that. We're going to be building our lookalike audiences against that. Well, let's see what happens if we look at the worst group of customers. uh-oh, the absolute worst group on the bottom also had straight hair. And oh, by the way, they're 33% of their customer base. So what was actually happening here happens all the time. They took the leading signal that seemed to be correlated with the best customers, which was having straight hair. And it turns out that signal was also highly correlated with their absolute worst customer, which means you need to move into those more buried signals, those secondary and tertiary signals like skin sensitivity in the case of this business. In the case of figs, it might be how many pockets they choose. So that's when you go beyond the human scale and you start using machine learning, because it'll pick up these buried signals and really help you not, in a sense, fall into that trap of that leading proxy signal. So in the case of this business, the big difference between the best and the worst was actually skin sensitivity. The worst group actually had less dry skin, and the top group was extremely oily, which again, that could probably apply to me as well. So that's a signal and a takeaway I want everybody to think about, because now what do you do with that? Well, first of all, you're going to build a different set of lookalike audiences, back to our point, to acquire a better customer first. But secondly, you're going to rethink your creative. And then finally, this is going to allow, and in the case of this business, here's what they did. For these customers that you just brought in that represent, in this case, over 50% of their base, but yet they're losing money on each one. That's why it's in red for the LTR. These are net unit economic losses for this business. Now they can actually go through and think, what is a better product offering I might want to offer here? Or where do we not have product market fit so that we can maybe build products for this kind of customer? So they're not dead and gone. They're not awful customers. They took this and strategically actually started rethinking what their products were and actually started retargeting this group with a completely different value proposition. So it's sophisticated, but at a strategic level, pretty straightforward. And when we get into Q&A, happy to drill down further on that. But that's what these kinds of techniques can unlock.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's interesting that it takes like a whole combination of factors to actually get to the right person. And James, I know this is kind of a good segue into one of your other examples, which is also in regards to hair. So I'll let you speak on that for a little bit.
Yeah, well, beauty and hair dye are really important right now. I have a sister, she's 3 years younger than me, and she tried to dye herself at home right now, and it turned out very poorly. So I've been having fun with her lately over FaceTime. But this was a beauty brand that does subscription hair dye. And one of the things we found, building off of that, you know, hair color, hair type, hair length, ethnicity, like all those important variables tie back to high lifetime value. And then how do you execute on that? How do you take action once you do have those higher lifetime value scores? And so something that was very counterintuitive to me, kind of coming into this early days, was we actually found if you give your best possible offers to your lowest lifetime value customers, is actually the best possible thing for the business, because your high LTV customers are going to spend the money anyways, in a sense. And so that was something that was very eye-opening for me and kind of counterintuitive, and maybe that's true for others. And so one thing that this company did very well is they were able to personalize the offer amount as well as the currency to the individual user, and then personalize what the actual image was so that customer could see themselves in the brand. And so I think this resulted in a 35% increase in revenue for this brand, being able to offer in front of each individual, save some margin by not giving away the $12 big discount to every single customer, and make sure that each customer is kind of seeing himself and becoming a very, very, sticky part of these users and of this group. So I think it kind of boils down to being able to execute. And one thing that Michael said that really resonated was just kind of being able to solve the limitations of just being a human and going through these. You need to kind of go beyond, and that's what technology allows us to do, right? We get to go beyond human limitation for this type of analysis. And I think maybe the most famous example is with Netflix. I don't know if you guys are a very, very data-driven company. I don't know if you ever saw this, but looking at what patterns, who are their highest LTV customers. And I believe the cohort they found was people who watch like 1980 movies with big car chases tended to be the highest lifetime value customers. And that's a question that maybe a marketer might have, like, hey, who are my biggest lifetime? But you don't have enough time in the day to try out, okay, what are all these patterns? They're no different than, you know, the hair length, hair color combo. How long would it take a human to go figure out 1980s car chases versus a machine could literally do that in one quick run? So I'm really excited about making all of this LTV scoring and making sure that it's all actionable, because it's what the best in the business are doing, and that's what we're trying to help all these brands do, is just make that level of AI accessible, because that's, you know, kind of the bar and the standard that customers expect these days.
Yeah, that's a great point, James. And it, you know, there are a lot of industries that we could take cues from, to that amazing point you made first, which is that the best customers you shouldn't discount up front, because it's, you know, a priori, they're going to buy from you. And so why would you get in front of that purchase with the discount that's already going to happen? You know, that price sensitivity and elasticity is better used for the discounts at the lower end. The flip side of that is I found that you then need to provide a better experience though. And so experience stratification for your best customers is something that does matter. And we've seen increases retention. And you have to look no further than some of the older industries, like airline industries, where, you know, you would fly by status and you would have first, business, and then economy class. They weren't discounting first. First was an experience offering where you would have discounting in economy. And so there was a great case study actually out of India from a leading grocer, where they found out who their best customers were. And instead of giving them more coupons, which happens all the time or had happened all the time in the American retail and grocery industries, they realized these people were going to buy anyway. We need to give them a better experience to retain them. So they actually gave them their own checkout line. It was almost like a first-class experience. And so I always want marketers to take that away, which is, for your best customers, optimize for experience. Obviously, you should do that for everyone. And that's where platforms like Resci help with this personalization at scale and experience. But I'm talking white glove experience for your best customers. And think about that pricing optimization and elasticity as you go downstream for lower LTV. It's a wonderful rule of thumb that we're seeing proven out.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines, in terms of COVID, how do you think about retention? Because a lot of people will start signing up for subscription services, such as, you know, getting hair dye at home. So how do you think about that? I'll throw it back to you, James. I know you have a case study on that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. I think Perfect Bar is a really good example, because they're a delicious, they're like the original refrigerated protein bar. And they're kind of dangerous if you start eating them. Every time you see them, you will buy one, like I do now. They are delicious, but they're sold out at a lot of the grocery stores. And so people's buying behavior is shifting online, and like that online purchase has accelerated so much in the last 6 to 8 weeks, because people who are now forced to go get the products that they're familiar with and love online. And so I think the first strategy that I see across, this doesn't just apply to Perfect Bar, but across any brand right now, are set expectations. Set expectations that there are probably going to be some adjustments. And so if you're having you know, any logistics issues or it's longer to deliver, set those expectations up early. Say it's going to take 2 weeks and deliver in 1 week. If you're sold out a product, offer gift cards. I think that's a very, very big thing, so that you can still keep revenue coming into the business, right? I see that from a lot of brands right now, is being able to offer gift cards. Also, if you are sold out a product, see this with a lot of skin and beauty brands as well. They are sold out. They're capturing that user information, putting them into a queue, and they're going to be the ones who are first, you know, in line to get that new product when it comes in. And I think that goes back to your experience piece, Michael, where it's like, how do you deliver that nice part to that customer? I see even brands offering up, you know, exclusive products if you subscribe, not just price discounting. It's like, yep, you get access to our stock for being a member now, which I didn't see much of that 2 months ago. The really kind of interesting thing around Perfect Bar was them being able to figure out, okay, they were a very, very lean team. And they were also very much a wholesale business. And their goal, why I wanted to bring it up, was CLV was a very important metric to them. And they wanted to do an intelligent job of promotional campaigns. I think to Michael's point, like, you don't just want to incentivize everybody with the exact same offer. And so how could they personalize their email campaigns based on behavior, and then really predict the most opportune time for each customer? And I think it goes back to that very, very first slide, 9 purchases. How can we make sure we get all 9 purchases? And if they start to fall off, they go slightly beyond the timing window of when they should be making that second, third, fourth purchase. How can we get in front of them? So in those moments when they're thinking about making a purchase, they get an actual email with something that resonates, and they go and they actually make the purchase. And so Perfect Bar was able to get about a 42% decrease in time between purchases by just being more intelligent about when they're reaching out to their customers who have previously bought. And that's our system doing some, purchase analysis and making sure that we can use Cortex, which is the name of our product, to automatically deliver the right email at the right time. I think timing is super, super important for this particular case study. And overall, email just drives a ton of revenue for every business. I think Perfect Bar was in the plus 30-40% of their online revenue. And so it's the #1 channel to engage customers, because that's where people really live.
Yeah, I love that, James. And one of the interesting things, before I kind of even, think about, the way what we're seeing in COVID, and obviously I almost like to say just in our new times that we're in, is what you were just talking about inter-transaction times. That ability to get the timing right and understand that behavior is shifting radically, so that you can now adjust to this new timing frequency a customer might have, because they've collapsed from omni-channel purchasing to that solo channel online, which means you're going to just see all that frequency shift over into one channel and thus have more visibility into it. That only happens if you have something tracking it and optimizing for it. It is impossible at the human scale to do that. So now that we're seeing these massive behavioral shifts happening, that at least in the near and midterm are going to have, they're not going to be evanescent, they're going to have some staying power. That's where a lot of the questions I'm getting from my customers start, which is, this cohort is behaving totally different than any other cohort. And so, one of the things I'd love to maybe revisit, Liz, would be going back to that slide where we're comparing different approaches to CLV. Because when you had a lot of historical data in your business, 3, 4, 5 years during the, the normal times, BC, before Corona, then you're going to be able to use a lot of these, right? You're going to be able to use these buy till you die models. Which at the time, completely cutting edge, and I don't have bad things to say about it, but you could also use at a low level these cohort and retention models, where you're using, again, these sort of heuristics of, well, this is how this cohort behaved before, so we can apply some of these guesses onto the new cohort. That doesn't work anymore. So you're now reduced to machine learning models that we talked about, and GLRM or cutting edge, neural network models. Because those are the only ones that can now take and adapt rapidly to this first transaction and start allowing you to see how this cohort will be behaving going forward without having to observe it for a year-long period. Because, I mean, to be frank with everyone, by Q2 next year, if that's when you're figuring out what to do about this cohort, pardon me being a Texan, but the horse has left the barn. So this is where I really want to drill down, and I would love people in Q&A, because I don't want to assume levels of technicality here, but I'd love to drill into this. Let me talk about what you should do with it, though. So if we go back to that top 3 group from the leading grooming brand that we showed. So in this group right here, you were just talking, James, about, all of a sudden these orders are starting to shift in. And we've got more customer service stress now, because people are going in and they're not getting their products at the right time, right? And we have to give this group a good experience. And all of a sudden now we're having to ship more because our omni-channel collapsed, and now we're the ones having to do all the shipping versus relying on, retail to take some of that pressure off. So one of the things we're now starting to work with all of our customers on, and I invite everyone, and afterwards we can send the link to some of the ways that you can actually calculate the ROI on this, is supply chain and customer service optimization when you can accurately predict customer lifetime value. So on the supply chain side, if I know I just got 10,000 orders in, and that's going to backlog and delay my normal shipping times from 2 days to 2 weeks, and I think we've all felt that recently, even from Amazon itself, when you try to order certain products, what I recommend to these customers is bias towards experience again. These are your best. So you can rank order your shipping tickets now and make sure that you're shipping out first to this higher value group. Huge, huge deal. This is going to really help prevent churn and lead to a lot of ROI and solve that thorny question of, instead of first in, first out, which is the normal way still we do shipping, to now this new class of experience that you give to these predicted to be better value customers. And so this is providing really, really helpful insights and optimization at a time where we're seeing this issue on supply chain. Secondly, customer service. Normally, as you know, the tickets come in on things like Zendesk. What we do is at Retina is we actually plug in and we rank order all those tickets now based on a customer's lifetime value and their issue. So if a person comes in with the same issue, well, I'm going to want to talk to the one that's worth $608 to me before I talk to the one that's worth $30. And this is a hard thing because we were always taught we love all of our customers and they're all created equal. But Liz, if we go down to that next slide with the worst customers, I hate to say this, that group's poison. That group means you don't get to see 2021 because each time they come in and buy from you, they're also taking $20 to $30 out of your pocket as well. So I want to talk to the people that are putting money back in my pocket. And these ways of thinking about optimizing for customer success and optimizing for experience in shipping are completely new techniques that are being developed, but they only happen when you can understand what a customer's worth early in the customer journey. So I think they're very cutting edge, and I think they're more important than ever because of the stresses that COVID is putting on even successful companies, where supply is now completely imbalanced out of the demand that's starting to pop for many of these businesses.
Got it. Well, this was a really comprehensive overview of CLV, how to apply that in terms of retention, as well as some other actions that can be taken for the business. So I'm going to open up to Q&A. I see we do have some here, so I will try to read from there. One question is around the quote from Neil Hoyne about how the value of the customer you acquire might be more important than retaining a customer. How would you address this? I can let Michael take that first.
Sure. So that goes to that concept of marketing elasticity. You know, James even alluded to it earlier when he said a good customer that comes in up front, don't discount them. They're going to buy anyway. Hidden in that truth is this concept of marketing elasticity. And again, there's been some amazing research, both out of Google with Neil Hoyne, as well as Professor Bodapati out of UCLA, in this subject of there are some people that up front have an intrinsic value and they already will behave a certain way. And there's only so much your marketing can inflect that behavior. So what I'm saying, and this is a little bit controversial, but I think it's important. It's you can move and optimize for customer behavior. As James said, hit them when they need to be touched. But I think we've all felt this anecdotally. Sometimes I'm just deciding I don't want any more of a product, or I do, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind. And so what we're talking about here is optimize for those customers that are already at a better product market fit for you. And the way you do that is by breaking them down into those special attributes we talked about and building better lookalike audiences off that and better creative off that. So if we think back to that discussion around people with straight hair, if I'm just building all the creative so everyone has straight hair in all my photos, or everyone is behaving a certain way when I go upload a value-based lookalike audience on Facebook, then Facebook's going to serve me up a blend of those high value and very low value customers. But if I have a more nuanced lookalike built on these more advanced techniques, then I'm going to be able to avoid absorbing a lot more of those one and done customers. And that's what we're talking about. And James, feel free if you want to add in anything else. That's how I would think about this.
I really, believe retention science or retention in general is extremely important. And I think the nuance of your question comes back to, where do you focus?
Yep.
Right? I think everyone knows the Bain quote that they've seen everywhere, that, you know, a 5% increase in retention can generate, you know, 125% in profits. But we're also all familiar with, you know, a business that sells a product as a loss leader to get customers in, or a business that has only price shoppers that just are buying because you have the cheapest price, and they don't actually make you money. And so, you know, part one of that retention aspect is, if you only focus on acquisition, you're going to see high churn numbers, which will probably lead to loss of revenue and not high profits. But if you focus your energy on who you should retain, that becomes a very important part. And we have some great examples of businesses suppressing their churned users from marketing campaigns. They're not spending money on ads with them. They're not sending them email campaigns. You know, they're not doing anything with these churned and dormant users. They're gone. I mean, your quote, I've never seen it before, but it resonates perfectly to this group. It's just, they are out the door. There's nothing you can do. And so don't spend money on these dormant churned customers and suppress them from your lookalike when you're doing more acquisition ads, because you don't want to find more of those. Like, if every customer that comes in the door from Google, it churns 10% faster than every customer coming in the door from Facebook, maybe focus your energy a little bit more on Facebook than Google. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was great. Good question.
Yeah. Another question that we got is around choosing the features you want to use in clustering to create segments. How do you think about that?
Yes.
Either of you can answer that.
Such a good question. Do you mind if I take that one, James?
Go ahead.
So this one is awesome. And this is where I see data scientist teams and marketing teams need to have a better dialogue. So I'll give you an example, and then I'll answer that question directly. But I love this example. And by the way, we're a data scientist first company. So believe me, what I'm about to say is said with love. There was a business we worked with that had a solo data scientist, and was asked for exactly this. What are the features that are the best predictors of high customer spend? And in this case, high customer lifetime value was sort of the hidden question. And so for 6 months, this particular data scientist, you know, was living in the data, munging it, trying to figure out different models. And then at the end of the 6-month period, came back, huge report. And at the end of the report, they said, I got it. It's the customers that have the highest order value are the ones that are worth the most to us. And I remember the CEO, thank goodness it was a low floor meeting and not like at the 10th floor, because I was worried that person was going to get thrown out the window. And it's not a problem. This is the problem with correlation versus causation. It's also a problem with what's actionable versus what's not actionable. So when you're picking these features, imagine on the other side of the room, you've got a marketer saying, so what? I always go through this so what exercise. So the first thing I say is, what is actionable? Are the features that I'm putting into the model going to then be actionable or leverageable by my marketing team? Meaning, is it something in the flow I can change? Is it something that'll affect the creative? Is it something that will help me build a better lookalike audience? Is it something that will help me on the retention side? If it's something you can't change, then you can still use those for predictive power, but I would bias first to actionability. That is a nice framework that I think about when building these models, so that you can drive all the way to impact and not just for predictability. If you just are building for predictability and you're building a model that is not interpretable, then throw more features in that don't necessarily have that bias to action. But if you're starting to use more cutting edge, non-ML based modeling and non-transaction only modeling like buy till you die, if you're starting to think about GLRM, which is what we leverage, then I go for actionability. Hopefully that's a helpful answer, and then we can talk about specifics and obviously available offline as well.
All right, awesome. This is more of a logistical question that either of you can answer. What is the minimum amount of data, transactions or years, that are needed to build predictive models?
James, I'm happy to go second or first, whatever you'd like to do on that one.
This question gets asked 10 times a day by our team at minimum. And so we always look at it from the approach of what's statistically significant. And so you have to have a certain amount of customer orders for us to be able to predict. And varies on the brand, right? If you're a mattress company and you're selling $1,000 mattresses, it's going to be slightly different than if you're a cosmetic brand selling $10 makeup. And so we generally look for minimum. I like to always talk about 10,000 to 25,000 orders is helpful as a minimum baseline, because even from a segmentation standpoint, if you pop up that database much smaller than 10 or 25,000, it's not going to make a tremendous impact. And most of the businesses we work with maybe start out at that level, and then they scale pretty quickly, to hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions.
Yeah, and what I would say is, Liz, if you want to really quickly go back to that slide that has the different models, depending on your model, you're going to have different prereqs, but at a high level, what I like to say is, first of all, is it bigger than Excel data? So for all of us who've put it through its paces, do you have more than 10,000 customers? Because then you also really are starting to think about automation. And secondly, the time period with which you have an observational window for both training and test. Your training and test window, I like to say for certain models, like in the case of ML, you really only want to predict out as far as what you have historically, because it doesn't have these generative draws. When you have things like buy till you die models, I like to say a minimum of 18 months of historical data so you can account for seasonality. And like I said, over 10,000 customers, we start really working with businesses usually that are well beyond that, unless they're long tail B2B businesses. Like, an Atlassian or something like that, you may not need, even though they probably have millions of customers, they may, there are other service businesses we work with that, that are under NDA, but they may only have 10,000 customers, but they have a lot of historical data. So it's a two variable problem here. It's how much historical data and how many customers do you have that you can then feed in, because what the model's doing is it's looking at this meta behavior that's going on. I always use the analogy of a school of fish. If you're scuba diving and you get really close to a fish, you can't really predict where it's going to go next. But all of a sudden you swim 100 feet out and you start to see it's behaving in this sort of larger pattern. That's that meta behavior, when you know how it's going to go based on how the rest of the school of fish is going. So that's how I like to think about these. And, each one has different variables and different, in a sense, fits that we're shaping to. But 18 months and 10,000 customers is a nice rule of thumb.
And actually, I think we should probably stay on this slide, because someone is asking, when using ML or GLRM, are you predicting the actual CLV or the number of future purchases and then applying their average revenue to convert to CLV? So a little more technical question.
Really good question. And whoever asked that, I would love to know if you've played around with buy till you die. So in the case of GLRM, we're actually doing a little bit of a combo with some other things going on here. But let's start with buy till you die, and then we can talk about ML. So with buy till you die, you're obviously predicting out transactions and applying some averages across it. And with ML, depending on the approach, you can actually get a little bit more sensitivity there. And you can actually get not just future purchases, but that total value on the purchase. And you can have some variability there. Similar to, you saw James's slide where this customer has sort of varying different cart sizes as they go on. With GLRM, what we're actually doing is kind of this concept of building a lookalike with some of these other approaches that then would be looking at predicting out both the frequency of purchases and varying size. But for some of these, like in buy till you die, you might be just predicting out future transactions, and then you're applying sort of some averages there, some smoothing that's going on. And so a lot of the error rates come actually in the form of how off you are in predicting future transactions. Hopefully that's helpful. People call it MAE, but again, happy to drill down on that.
Wonderful. And I think probably the last question, James, you can take this one. How do you discount for customer retention costs into the future? It could be that some of the active customers could also turn out to be the ones with the most high maintenance. For example, too much price or promotion sensitive.
Sure. Again, really good one. And it doesn't always have to be price or promotion. I think you kind of need to look at the timeline. I think that's the most important part, and the number of purchases over time. So if we take, the average order value and the number of expected future purchases, and we look at the potential promotion and the amount of margin you have to give as a promotion, how can you engineer that so your promotion amount is less than your AOV amount? You want to be profitable at the end of the day. And I think that's where suppressing users with below a certain future spend number, right? If we know the likelihood that someone will make a purchase of $20 in the future, don't give them a $20 off coupon. But if we know that they're going to spend $100, maybe they are worth a $20 coupon to you. And so figure out those thresholds that are right for your business. And I always encourage you to look at how similar customers are using offers or shopping. If you have a customer that's always buying with a discount, we know it's just a price shopper. But there's other ways than just promotions. I think the experience thing that Michael mentioned earlier, find ways that they can, get a better experience with the brand. Free gift with purchase is generally a great way, or, a complimentary product with an order is a great way to retain customers, really build a solid relationship with them, because you're able to, maybe something that you sell for $10 costs you $2. You're able to get, $10 in perceived value by only spending $2 by giving them something for free. So there's a lot of ways that you can go about making sure your retention costs are, and those existing and new customers. And at the end of the day, so it's definitely worth it to spend, and focus the energy on making sure you're providing good offers to the right customers who are actually going to spend money with you in the future.
Wonderful. Actually, we have time to do one more question. As you introduce new products targeting different segments, how do you prioritize customers who have low LTV in one segment, but maybe high LTV in a different segment? So kind of like, how do you combine the information? Michael, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So one of the things that we do is we actually have these customer journey maps. So you can look at LTV as a function of product journey. And that's how I would think about it, is first of all, a higher level aggregate visualization where you can see the flows based on product sequencing and how that increases or decreases customer lifetime value. So a great example of this was with Dollar Shave Club. So Dollar Shave Club was one of our earliest customers. And we found that, when people came through the classic channel of buying one of the razor packages, that all of a sudden when they then purchased, for instance, a lower price product, it was a $3 shave butter, and clearly in the time of COVID, I'm not using any of these products, but the way that what would happen would be it would increase their customer lifetime value by something like 3x. And this was meaningful. It added something like $8 million to top line. And so in this case, what they started experimenting with, which is where this question goes, is should you bundle it? Should you put it up front? This inflecting product, and that's the experiment that you then run. So if you have lower value products, but you're seeing they're inflecting or deflecting customer lifetime value, you can start to play with this sequencing as a form of testing. And part of what we love to do is propose all of these experiments or tests in product sequencing and pathing. The other side of that question is, what if it's a high or low value customer? Well, hidden in that question, which again, this was clearly a very astute person, was depends on what product they hit first. And so if they were unfortunate enough to be paired up with the wrong product first, they might be artificially low. And if they'd had the right product first, they might have been higher. So what you again do is you look at those customer journeys and you start to see if, customers that were coming in that looked a lot like, from the clustering standpoint, those customers that came in through a different product window, you can start to experiment with the ones that came in low value that look a lot like the ones that came in high value through these different products, maybe start testing on inverting them. And that is another way to think about it. So again, you have to run experiments. There's correlation, not causation. But personal anecdotal example to make it real for everyone here is, when I came through a particular retail brand, the first thing I bought from them was a pair of socks. And they probably thought I was terribly low value. And then after some experimentation, started promoting suiting to me, and I became a very high value customer. But I probably looked a lot like the person who usually comes in through suiting first in terms of other attributes that I was bringing to the table. So customer journey mapping as a function of CLV and product sequencing is the way I would think about that question.
Awesome.
Yeah,
well,
completely agree. Like if some sort of market basket analysis to figure out what are the co-pairs of that new product and how do they sell together or how are they frequently bought. I actually think for, if they're high LTV on a second segment, people want to see new things. They want exposure to the brand. And so making sure that segment 2 sees the new product, even if it's not their most likely thing, that discovery is actually kind of what the internet's about. And so it's really good to get that in front. So you're not always top of mind. You're not always just sell, sell, sell. It's getting the new products with the right purchases automatically based on like you looking at customer data and who's buying what and what's in the cart for each order.
Great. That totally makes sense. I think this is a great note to end on. I know we're at the top of the hour, but here is some contact information for both Michael and James in case you have other questions. We're recording this session, so we'll provide that to you as well as the answers to the questions that were asked. So thank you all so much for coming, and thanks Michael and James for a great session.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if I can be a resource or help your brand, I'd love to.
Likewise. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.